we're going to get down now to the brass tacks of the meeting. I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer Fresquez. She is our program director, and she has set up the program today. We're going to hear from Mo Hickey from Voices for Utah Children, Sue Robbins, who unfortunately at the last minute, Troy was not able to make this meeting, but Sue was on the Hill every day with him this last session. And so we're going to have Sue Robbins speaking on behalf of Equality Utah. And then we've got Jennifer Daly Provo, who will try her very best to catch us up on some of the things that happen in the legislature also. And then we've got several other legislatures that may want to chime in on some things that were important to them. I hope we're going to have time for that in our Q&A. So Jennifer, I will turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Robin. So excited to see so many people here today. It's awesome to see this many people show up. So thank you all for being here, for donating your lunch money. I know it'll go to great causes, so I'm really excited about that. We're going to start off with Sue Robbins. I'm not 100% sure if all of you have seen her bio because it was a change near the end. So I'm going to just put that out into the chat. So you're welcome to read that. I don't want to take up all of her time by saying how wonderful she is. She is on Equality Utah's Transgender Advisory Council. I'm very excited to hear from her. If you do have questions for any of our panelists today, please put it into the chat. I'll monitor the chat, and then as soon as they've had a chance to speak, we will ask all of those questions. So if you have anything you want to ask, put it out there. I'll keep on top of it, and we will get your questions answered. Sue, if you're ready, we're ready for you.
Well, great. Well, thank you. And I do want to qualify one thing. Troy was on the Hill every day. I was involved in every step of the 2 transgender bills with him, along with a few other discussions we had on bills that may have just had a word or two that kind of impacted the transgender community. So not quite the kind of effort Troy puts in, but it was a pretty hard year nonetheless. And I appreciate the opportunity to be able to present this. So I don't know how much everybody has kept up with this part of the national scene, but the anti-transgender bills that we see across the nation are a product of the Alliance Defending Freedom. And this is what I call the anti-ACLU, but they very much target the LGBTQ plus community. And what happened about a year and a half ago is they came to an agreement with ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, which takes bills and sends them out to all the legislatures and tries to get all the state legislatures to pass these standardized bills. So it gave them a foothold to be able to put bills out fast, and a lot of them, and hit a lot of states. And obviously in Utah, that type of bill probably passes through the Eagle Forum more often than not. So last year in 2020, we saw both a bill impacted healthcare for the trans youth, and one that never quite got to be numbered, but the sports bill, taking transgender youth out of sports, also made it through a draft, but that was in the last week, so it never got numbered. So this year, we basically saw the same things happen again. HB 92 came out first, or was the first one we really were involved in. It was sponsored by Rex Ship, and it was written to take away any transgender-related healthcare for our youth, age 18 and under. One note that got far less attention in it, because we very much talked about the transgender aspect of it, is the intersex community is out there all the time advocating, let's stop operating on intersex babies for medically unnecessary surgery, because most intersex surgeries are cosmetic. They are not medically necessary. So that was written in to protect that. While they were trying to take medical health care away from the transgender community, they were trying to affirm it against the intersex community. So these bills attack healthcare that has been wide use and affirmed by the American Medical Association, the National Endocrine Association, and many other large medical associations. It got stuck in roles. Last year, Representative Dawes' bill that he ran, we kept meeting with him, and the bill kept getting watered down till it was a study, and then it was voted down in the House. And our takeaway on that was people don't want to get between parents and the doctors on their youth health care. So this type of bill isn't very popular to start with. Well, it was in rules, it was having trouble getting out, and Substitute 1 was written that removed the block on puberty blockers, but left a block on surgeries. Now, I didn't get the exact timing on Substitute 1 versus it coming out of rules, but it came out of rules and went to the Health and Human Services Committee, and all of a sudden Substitute 2 came in that reinstated everything that was in the original bill, although it did lower the age from 18 down to 16. So that made it into the committee. And then we had our hearing, and it was my first foray into a Zoom committee hearing of this type. And one of the things I found interesting is the amount of non-Utah voices that were involved were tremendous. The sponsor brought in many, many voices, and they were almost predominantly from a group called the American College of Pediatricians, which is an anti-LGBT group in Florida. The American Academy of Pediatricians is 70,000 strong. They're medically based. The American College of Pediatricians is about 700 people, and they go out and they attack the LGBT community. At the end of the committee hearing, after it was all done, the committee went ahead and sent it back to rules at the end, and it died there. So to me, we won the battle, but not the war on that one, because we didn't get an up or down vote. And it was interesting that it went back to rules. And my read is the fact that I believe, like I said, I didn't see the timing of Substitute 1, but if Substitute 1 is what got it out of rules, and then instantly Substitute 2 tried to reverse all that, then getting sent back to rules seemed like a wrist slap to say, we only let it out because you made these changes, and then you turned it right back around on us. That's my read on that. We'll kind of have to see how it goes in the future with these type of bills. And then the one that got zero press, the sports bill for our trans youth. This is a huge topic for us. I think it came at the transgender community nationally before we had really worked up a strategy around how to go at this. So the large national organizations have a lot of great thoughts, but there hadn't been any campaigns out there ahead of time. So this one was sponsored by Representative Kara Birkeland in the House, and it was called Preserving Sports for Female Students, and I preferred to call it Erasing Transgender Girls from Sports, because it wasn't pro-female, because it wasn't lifting women's sports. It was, if it was lifting women's sports, then we would properly fund them. We would have better fields. We would have better equipment. That's lifting women's sports or girls' sports. What it did is it just came in and said transgender girls can't compete, period. So is anti-transgender to me in that manner. So that was its goal. And the initial bill was from kindergarten through college. Before it ever went into committee, they removed the college, which I presume was to remove any potential combating from the NCAA, because the NCAA previously had pulled out of North Carolina a major tournament because they had a transgender bathroom bill pass. So I assume that was self-protecting in that manner. So just a note from our perspective, transgender people have been competing in sports that they identify with for many years. The NCAA has the exact same policy Utah High School Handbook has, and that's been in place for 10 years without an issue. And the Olympics has had a policy in place since 2004 that's very similar, without even any transgender people making it to the Olympics. They all can't get past the trials. So those are the things that we say, well, we can accept that, and that's been acceptable for all these years without having any issues. It went into the House Health and Human Services Committee, and it passed out to the House. It passed the House with a fairly large passing vote, which made us a bit nervous about how that momentum was going. But when we got over to the Senate Health and Human Services Committee, first off, a compromise came out. And I say compromise lightly because to me, compromise is when two sides come together and they agree on something. And this was, we got called in to talk about the bill, and we were told, here's your compromise. And basically what it said is transgender girls can be on girls' teams, but they can't compete. Which is like, you can sit at the kitchen table during dinner, but you don't get to eat. It's really not an acceptable thing. So that's what was put before the Senate Health and Human Services Committee. And well known, I guess, that Senator Andrigg made it very well known that he hated the bill. So as we went through that committee hearing, the committee on the whole only spoke against the bill, and a large part of the public comment was against the bill. And we had Silicon Slopes in there. We had medical professionals. We had the universities here, the major universities, all speak against the bill. The interesting part at the end was that instead of an up or down vote, There was a motion to adjourn the committee meeting, which was accepted, which just made the bill die in place. So again, when I look at what the future is going to be on this, is we had two bills that were both killed through non-voting, through just vote to move ons, basically, so that they died in place. So we didn't get a good up or down vote to be able to get a feeling on these and how they might go in the future. I think the medical health care part is possible that it may disappear. It really just has never been popular, but there's always someone that seems to want to take up the bill, similar to the old bathroom bills. The sports bill is the one I'm pretty certain will be back. I don't see Representative Birkeland totally backing off of it, and Representative Schultz has also gone online saying that it's a priority bill for him, so he wants to see it come back. So a big part of what we'll have to look at throughout the year is what the national scene does. There's over 80 anti-transgender bills across 28 states that are out there. Most of them are around the healthcare and the sports. None of the healthcare has passed yet. On the sports front, there's been 3 that had passed in South Dakota, Arkansas, and Tennessee. The interesting one in Tennessee is the only one so far that said all transgender people have to compete in sports. That's what aligned with their birth status. That means transgender men on hormones, testosterone hormones, will have to compete against girls. And we had this happen in Texas a few years back where they did the same kind of law. And there was a young transgender man that loved wrestling. He's actually wrestling at the college level right now in men's wrestling, but he was forced to wrestle in the girls' divisions, which he didn't want. And he was the state champion 2 years in a row. And they didn't like that, but it was their own law that forced him there because he wanted to be over in the boys section. So we have Mississippi, Arkansas, and Tennessee passed laws. South Dakota looked like they were going to pass it, but their governor kicked it back to the legislature saying she wanted some changes. They refused. So she just issued an executive order, which we'll see how that carries over time. Some of the other things we're seeing, and this kind of a closing comment, Tennessee has a law or a bill going through where they want to put signs on all bathrooms that are warning signs that say, you maybe go into a restroom with someone of the opposite sex if you use this facility. There's a lot of mixed bills in there about religious discrimination and being able to not provide health care to a transgender or an LGBT person if you have religious concerns. And this is a big topic across the nation. So I think for Utah, the big one looking for it next year is the sports bill. The medical bill may come back up, but I think its lack of popularity isn't going to raise it to the level of the sports bill. The sports bill, we need to have a lot of discussions before we get to the next session and raise more awareness about what really is the truth out there about things, because the amount of misunderstandings caused a lot of furor around this board. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you for the update, and thank you for all the work you're doing to help support and protect our transgender communities, as well as everyone in the LGBTQ group. Thank you. You're welcome to unmute if you'd like to clap, or just give her a little clap sign. Thank you. That was fantastic. If you do have any questions for Sue, please put them in the chat and we'll get those to her to make sure we can get your questions answered. Excellent job. We're going to announce Mo Hickey next. He is with Voices for Utah Children, excuse me. I'm going to put the link in for him as well so that you can donate or at least check out their organization. Mo, we're looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And I do want to start off by saying I don't normally wear a hat indoors, but I just recently had a surgery. So you don't want to see it, trust me. And the hat covers it. We went into this legislative session, so I'll back up a little bit. Pre-legislative session, we were concerned about a couple of items in particular. So Amendment G, which had passed, which actually moved education funding from the income tax, where it had been held for quite a long time solely for the use of education, had been shifted over into with the general fund. So one of our concerns was, and we're still concerned about this, is the math of 1 + 1 does not equal 3. So by combining the two pots of capital, we weren't seeing an increase in revenue to meet the additional needs that we know we have in the state of Utah. The second part of that was what revenue would be available for social services and social service needs that we've identified. I am happy to say that as far as on the education front, the legislature did hold true to the promises they had made prior to the session as far as educational funding. They did increase educational funding substantially relative to our starting base. One of the challenges we have there is we, even with the increased funding that we did receive, we're still dead last in the country in per pupil funding. That may change this year, ironically, not because of the fact that we've moved up dramatically, but Idaho seems to be racing to the bottom and they're having trouble with their revenues currently. So you may see a shift there for the first time, probably in over 20 years in terms of Utah's place. Some of the things that we were following, and we have a very simple filter at Voices, and we start off with, is it good for kids? And we were coming into the session advocating on behalf of some things in early childhood, predominantly on the kindergarten front, where we had been advocating for a number of years to get increased funding for optional enhanced kindergarten. Utah is one of only 6 states in the country where kindergarten is totally optional. We do fund half-day kindergartens at the LEAs, but we're seeing a tremendous increase in the need from parents in the workforce for their child to be in a safe environment for a longer period of time. We had received $7 million in funding in the 2020 session, additional funding for OEK. That was taken away in the special session over the summer. We did have $7 million reinstated during this past session. So we were happy to see that happen. There was an additional $3 million in funding for school readiness grants, which go out and school districts can bid on those, basically to enhance their pre-K programs, which again are not mandatory in the state of Utah and are totally optional at the district level. So in addition to that, we saw $5 million in restored funding for teacher training, professional development in pre-K to third grade. That was an important piece because, again, if we're going to be expanding our kindergarten services and making changes there, we felt we needed to have a workforce that was trained in some of the changes they would be seeing coming down the road. One thing to look out for in the kindergarten space, we're seeing this across the country right now, and we're a little concerned. We haven't heard too much yet in Utah, but there's a new term you might hear nationally, which is kindergarten redshirting. A lot of parents who in the past year had not put their child into kindergarten or were homeschooling or using some combinations of the above are going to redo kindergarten with their child again this coming year, once they're in person. That could cause some interesting funding shifts. It could cause some interesting head counts across the board. And it could put some burdens on school districts that maybe we're not fully anticipating. So it's something we are looking at pretty closely. We also saw an increase in the expansion in eligibility for working families to receive state child care support and several bills that were around the child care area. Now, again, good news, we're starting to see a focus on child care in the state of Utah. It's something that's been lacking. Bad news is 2 separate national reports had identified Utah as 51st in child care going into the pandemic. I don't necessarily know that we're going to come out of it that much stronger, but one of the really interesting parts for us to look at now is with the federal relief that's come in, we've received probably more money than we've ever had in child care, specifically 0 to 3 child care since I've been involved. And it does give us an opportunity to look at some of our needs, some of our demands, and particularly child care deserts, which we have in a lot of our rural communities. One thing, this will be across the board with the federal funding, and we keep stressing this to people, it's one-time funding that's coming in right now. However, it does not have to be spent until the end of fiscal 2024. So basically, we have almost 3.5 years to spend the money. So we're advocating for long-term planning, relatively long-term, 3.5 years, where we can actually work in programs, identify needs, build systems out that hopefully can then be adopted by the state as we finish up our federal funding piece. One area this year, juvenile justice, we felt we had a very strong session. Utah's juvenile justice department, Brett Peterson, who runs it, is doing a fantastic job. It's one of the more progressive departments in the state. He is a true leader. So a couple of the things that we saw were a bill outlining and clarifying the Miranda rights of youth who are being interrogated by police. A lot of times, especially when it was a resource officer at the schools, they were being told they had to speak to the officer without a parent being present or another adult. And it's just something that clarifies that so everybody understands what the rule is on the ground. There's a really innovative pilot program to offer youth college courses through Dixie State University, and that program is launching. We had one of our representatives also who works at UVU wants to get UVU involved in that program. So we may see that program expand. The idea being, especially for our youth that are in facilities, that they actually come out either with a high school degree or with concurrent credits going into the university system so that they do have some direction as they're coming out. The school-based resource officers, there was a moratorium on criminal enforcement of state truancy laws during the months of the pandemic, which really made sense. We had a lot of students that were disconnected during the past year. We don't even know where a lot of the students are at the moment. So rather than turn it into a punitive situation, there was an agreement that we should actually work together to bring those students back into the system in a positive way. On the healthcare front, we actually had I would say, an interesting session there. Utah, over the past year, had the largest growth of percentage per capita of uninsured children in the country. We currently have close to 90,000 children without health insurance of any form in the state at the moment. Also, what's interesting about that is it breaks down almost equally from the Wasatch Front to the rural districts. So it's a statewide problem, although a lot of people have felt it's been more of a Wasatch Front problem. There was a bill by Senator Escamilla to provide coverage for all children. What was interesting about that was the bill passed unanimously, but it passed without funding. And executive appropriations then did not fund it. However, because of the federal funding that has come in and some of the expansion that's currently available, we feel okay for the coming 6 months, but that's something we're going to be supporting Senator Escamilla heading into the next session to not just pass the bill as a feel-good bill, but to actually have some funding behind it. House Bill 262 provided ongoing funding for CHIP and Medicaid outreach. One of the things we found over the years is a lot of the families are eligible for benefits that they don't even know they're eligible for. So we were pleased with that. Kind of goes hand in hand with one of the bills. There was an English-only bill too that was not healthcare related, but will have effects on healthcare. So now municipalities and local entities can provide information in other languages to do some of this outreach so that we can get people where they need to be and get them signed up for the programs that they are eligible for. The legislature also did some changes to ensure that funding for Utah's maternal mental health program and awareness campaign were made permanent. So we want to thank Representative Daley Provost for being the champion on that issue. There was also quite a few bills on mental health that were really important. We still have the same problem in mental health that we've had for the past couple of years. We seem to have leveled out at the moment, but again, per capita, we have the highest rate of teen suicide in the country. We are leveled off, it looks like, over the past year, year and a half. Really, this is an access and provider issue as much as anything else. So we're working with a number of entities, with the obvious IHC and the University of Utah, but also with the Utah Electronic and Telehealth Network, which is a state backbone system where we can actually hopefully pair them together to provide some telehealth services directly into the schools or into public libraries or into universities, so that we can give kids access to services that they may not be able to get in a lot of our rural communities. Sorry, it was a fairly busy session. Taxes was, well, another couple of things. One of the things we worked with was, you probably heard it, a student out of the Salt Lake School District wanted to have students to be eligible 16 and older to vote in local school board elections. Dodie was amazing to work with. If anybody gets a chance, and I suggest this group gets her on board early, she is unbelievably bright, passionate, and articulate, and we're going to continue to work with her moving forward. There was bipartisan support putting the bill together, which was interesting. Sadly, I think most of the opposition came from local school districts, who I don't know fully understood that it was an optional bill, that they could embrace it or not embrace it. So I think there's some education that has to be done on before it comes back next year. She has definitely expressed her interest in working to bring the bill back next year. So we'll be hearing more from her on that bill. I mentioned the official language bill. It wasn't as detailed as we would have liked it to have been, but we felt it was a first step in at least allowing local entities to provide funding for not just being able to publish information in English, but to be able to publish it in other languages. Tax and budget, it was an interesting session for us in taxes. There were 3 tax cuts passed. One was on Social Security, which was an $18 million tax credit. Military retirement, $24 million, and $55 million tied to the personal exemption on dependent tax credit. It put us at odds with some people that we're generally on the same side with on some of these issues in the nonprofit world. Our opposition was not to the concept. Our opposition was to the actual end product. What you're going to see as these roll out is that the vast majority across all 3 bills went to the top 40% of earners, and approximately 1% went to the bottom 40%. So we felt it was actually a regressive approach, and that we had asked for tweaks so that there could be refundable tax credits for the lower 40%, so that they would actually have garnered a benefit, who are the people that need it the most, which is why we were opposed to it. We also, in 2020, we had for the first time gotten a $7 million put towards an earned income tax credit to match the federal earned income tax credit. That was taken away during the special session, and we couldn't get it reinstated during this session. Those were pretty much the highlights of the session. We were also, I'll just mention, some of the bills that we were supportive of that weren't necessarily directly bills we were working on, but we were supportive of the Equal Rights Amendment. We feel that that has to be something that we pass in Utah, especially so that young women feel that they are treated equally, that they have equal opportunities in the state. So that's a bill we're very passionate about. We were in opposition to the trans bills that Sue mentioned earlier. They were harmful to children, plain and simple. So we were opposed to that. And lastly, one of the things we would like to work on moving forward, in my previous pre-Voices, I was on the Park City School Board, and we were pleased at that time to be the first school district in the state of Utah to pass an anti-discrimination, anti-harassment policy for all students and all employees of the district. Sadly, that was in 2010. I think currently, I'm trying to get this information, but I think we only have 3 school districts out of 41 that currently have a comprehensive policy in place. We would like to see that be a legislative priority, so that a lot of the bills that come in on the fringes that discriminate and harass children could be covered under a broader bill. And that's something hopefully we'll be working with groups like Equality and the Utah Pride Center and others to move that forward. So,
Excellent.
thank
Thank you so much, Mo. Before we move on, and just briefly, Senator Reeby is wondering what the district responses are to, I think you called it redshirting, where they put the children into kindergarten for the second year. She's thinking maybe some of the districts have policies with specific dates of when you're allowed, or do you know how they're handling that?
Some districts may have policies. That's something we're going to be looking with. I'll be talking to the superintendent on Monday, actually, to find out what she's hearing. But, you know, I know that there are, I'll go by Park City. There are dates certain that you'd have to apply to get in if your child was younger. But there was no, I know we don't have a policy that if your child is older. Because generally speaking, I think most parents, when their child is 6 years old or around the age of kindergarten, late 5, generally speaking, that's been a natural progression to go into kindergarten. So I don't know that it's anything that we've fully anticipated, but that's a good question from Senator Reeby, and I'll bring that up with the superintendent, because it does really affect different funding streams.
Fantastic. Representative Waite has a couple of fantastic comments out there. If you'd like to peruse those are really points that you can bring up with your representatives regarding the transgender bills. And so if you're going to reach out to your representatives, utilize those for sure. I'll continue to monitor and see if we have some more comments or questions. So if you have more, put it out there, and we'll hit those as soon as we have finished hearing from Representative Jennifer Daly Provost, who is here joining us today. I'm very excited to hear from her. I will also put her contact information in the chat. But again, let me know if you have questions, and we will address those as soon as we are finished with Representative Daly Provost.
And
Hi,
Jennifer,
everybody.
can I jump in really quickly, Jen?
Sure.
Jennifer. I wanted to say, not only are those points for representatives, but I think those points, I actually encourage people to talk to your friends, neighbors, relatives who are in districts where their representatives did not vote against those trans bills or in alignment with the bills we're talking about. Because they're the people who elect those representatives. And it's kind of a point of saying, do you know what your representative is doing? So in addition to speaking to representatives, when we talk to our friends, neighbors, people we go to church with, those are the people who will vote. And to say, do you know that our representative did this and this and this? Then they start to think, and it raises their awareness. Okay, I'll be quiet. Thank you.
Excellent point. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. I can't tell you how much I appreciate and treasure Liz's insight and willingness to really go out and speak for all of our communities in the state. So I know that we're getting late in the day. I want to be as quick as I can. And thank you, Jennifer, for putting my contact info. Please don't hesitate to email me if you have more questions. But the title of today's meeting was The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And so I want to just hit a couple of highlights really quick. Some good things that happened this session on reproductive health. Not only did we face down and fight back 2 bad abortion bills, which is rare because abortion bills tend to really fly through our legislative session. There were 2 bills, one Representative Cheryl Acton, one Steve Christiansen, both died before they really had much of a hearing. And so I was excited about that. We did make a little bit of progress due to the incredible support of so many community members on contraception for inmates. This was a bill that I ran 3 times. We finally got it passed this year, just to make sure that some of our most vulnerable are able to stay on their hormonal contraceptives, their prescribed medications. It should never be considered a discretionary medication, and certainly not by the discretion of a police officer or a sheriff who is not a healthcare provider. So that was an exciting win this year. We did have some progress on some modest police reform. We didn't get nearly as much as we wanted or should have, but we are moving, I think, hopefully in the right direction. particularly with regard to reporting requirements and the way that law enforcement interacts with people who are suicidal. Representative Matthews, as Mo mentioned, did pass a really great bill to improve funding access for low-income families for access to childcare. We know that this pandemic is creating what's known as the she-cession, and women are really struggling under the economic pressure that we have dealt with this last year. And one of the keys, obviously, is making sure that mothers have a safe place for their children to be, so that they can go to work and take care of their families. Representative Romero, ever the amazing advocate for helping domestic violence victims, did some great policy work this year on domestic violence. And our own Claire Collard, I hope she's still here, and Senator Kitchen collaborated to get $15 million in affordable housing funding, which was a huge win. That was an ask that was made for years and years, and they were successful in getting that passed. And a huge kudos to Representative Collard in her first session in getting that accomplished. Some bad bills. There were a lot of attacks on ballot initiatives and the ability to have access to the ballot box. That is something that I think that we can continue to expect going forward and need to remain vigilant on. The pandemic endgame bill by Representative Ray was just a premature catastrophe of a bill, trying to take away the science in dealing with this ongoing pandemic. And I am really concerned will truly put lives and economic well-being of a lot of Utahns at risk before we're finally on the other side of this. We're still struggling incredibly with structural racism in our state and in our country, as evidenced by the failure of Representative Waite's amazing resolution that would have encouraged communities to have conversations about mascots and using and misusing and abusing people and races in their school mascots. That decision by the House to not pass that was derided by a lot of local leaders, and I hope and I know that she will continue to be a leader in having that conversation as we work toward really getting to the heart and the root of racism that is so deeply entrenched in our communities. And of course, the ERA run by Senator Reeby was disregarded again, and something that we know that we still have to continue to work on. A couple of ugly bills. There were riot amendments that passed that are really unfortunate, that put community members who want to peacefully assemble at risk, particularly our marginalized and communities of color. So I know we've still got a lot to do on that. The transgender bills, Sue covered those really well, but she is absolutely right. We still have we have so much work to do on this before we find our communities and our society finally gets to a point where these attacks have to stop. As she mentioned, the athletics bill was changed to allow girls to participate but not to compete in sports, and she hit it on the head. This was introduced as the compromise, but there was never, you can't have a compromise until all stakeholders are at the table. And one of the fatal flaws, there were many fatal flaws, but one of the fatal flaws in this bill was that the sponsor never reached out to communities that it affected, never sought impact. And then when it was defeated, she jumped on social media and started to claim that she invites everybody to the table to have conversations. And so it's not just the substance of these bills, it's the way that they're going about them that is deeply troublesome. I mean, I commented in my statements on the House floor against this bill that there are known ways to address this. We've, as Sue mentioned, that's been shown by national organizations and international organizations for decades. And it was just lazy legislation. And her argument for running the bill was that women are getting the shaft in sports, and keeping trans kids out of sports doesn't solve any of those problems. And so, and then of course the transgender healthcare bill, I really wanted that to die. And I'm glad that it was defeated on a technicality because of the way the sponsor handled the substitutes of that bill. But I didn't even want that to come to a committee hearing, because the last thing we want are the children in our state to hear legislators, lawmakers argue about their humanity. And so it was unfortunate that we even had to have that committee hearing, that the Rules Committee allowed for it to come out at all. But the testimony was horrendous, and it was clearly the people that were calling in from out of state were clearly just some of the worst ilk of homophobic, anti-LGBT rhetoric, horrible people you could imagine. And it was really, really hard to sit through, first, even for me. And, you know, I can't imagine what it would have felt like for those whose humanity and basic just being a good human being had to hear from that. And so I apologize for every one of our community members that have to hear that have to continue to have to go through that. We'll keep fighting with you, I promise, and I'm really, really sorry. Some of you may have seen in the news recently the debacle with the Salt Lake County Republican Party and their chair resigning in the wake of scandals and not supporting women candidates and women in their party. And that's a deeper conversation that we obviously need to have. But it was interesting with regard to the transgender sports bill. I was reading some comments on social media when Governor Cox criticized the way this county party had handled that. And it was alarming to me how many people attacked Governor Cox's comments about supporting women by saying that he didn't support women's sports because he spoke out against the transgender sports bill. And so that's just a signal to me that, you know, we still have so much work to do as a society and to help people understand what's truly going on. And some of these comments were truly horrendous, you know, just basically saying you're letting boys beat girls. And I mean, we all know, I don't need to preach to anybody. I don't think it at this meeting it's just not what the argument or the issue is. But, you know, when it came right down to it, I think what finally killed that bill was the new owner of the Utah Jazz. It wasn't about humanity. It wasn't about kids. It was about the economics of basketball tournaments. You know, on issues like these, I'll take a win where I can. But that the fact that this argument gets legs at all is a travesty. So we absolutely have a lot of work to do. I do have to thank, you know, we do have some Republican allies in opposition to these trans bills, and so it's really, really good to see that. We have a lot of, like I said, we have a lot of work to do, but some of the support is there. So I'm anxious to figure out where we can continue to educate and to learn how I can continue to be an ally in every way possible. I saw a note, there was definitely some bad gun bills that came up this year, but it is now 1:08, and so I'm past time. I am going to leave it there. My email's in the chat, please. I know all of my amazing colleagues are anxious to hear from you if you wanted to send us a quick email or a phone call. Thanks. I love WDC.
Thank you. That was fantastic. Thank you for everything that you do for us up on the Hill and for the update that you just gave. We did have a question prior to our meeting. Someone said, Ann Stringham says, she saw on TV that Utah was among the 47 states whose legislatures voted in suppression methods during this past session. Do any of you want to speak to that? Jennifer, do you have any?
My guess is that she was probably referring to voter suppression, just making it harder to get ballots on or ballot initiatives on the ballot. Harder. We've got legislators that keep chipping away at you know, the voice of the people, and it was really alarming to me. Representative Jordan Tusher, who replaced Representative Kim Coleman I can't remember, South Jordan, West Jordan. Literally said in the committee, in Government Operations Committee, that the problem with the ballot initiatives is that people are trying to change the outcome of an election. And he was referring to people registering as Republicans to vote in the governor primary. And I wanted to be like, that's what voting is. You're trying to affect the outcome of an election. And so there's a really big disconnect here that I think that we need to work on. But along with the transgender stuff, we've got these organizations that are really pushing policies across the nation. The same is happening with voter access.
Yeah, that is a little mind-boggling. The voting is supposed to change the outcome. That's the goal. So yeah, but I think I've hit most of the questions that we had. But if anybody else has another one, throw it out there. I'm loved hearing from all of our speakers. You all did a fantastic job. Thank you for joining us today. Next month we have Noah Rosenberg will be talking to us about redistricting. And then Representative Ashley Matthews will be joining us to talk about her passion for bees and the legislation that she recently helped get passed for that. So that'll be exciting. So please spread the word and join us for that. And yeah, I'm thrilled at all your advocacy. Thank you for fighting for people like ourselves. I'm very excited to have you with us, and thank you for talking today. Robin?
Thank you, Jennifer. That was terrific. We have a short little time here for announcements. Thanks for everybody that stayed. I know this is a little bit long, but boy, hasn't that been great? We've gotten such fantastic information. I would